Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fast Chat as we discuss unpacking the carbon benefits of timber construction. I'm David Bodamer. I'm the Editorial Director for Wealth Management Real Estate, and joining me today for this discussion is Alan Organschi, who is a principal at Gray Organschi Architecture and Director of the Building Lab at the Yale University School of Architecture. So welcome, Alan. Thank you so much for taking some time.
Thanks, David.
So, looking at this question of, we're going to talk about timber construction, which is, from a commercial real estate background, this is kind of an interesting thing to see now, like more talk of using this, versus the materials that we're used to. So I'm curious, and I know that it's something that's also obviously in the residential space as well, even more. So the first question I have is, what are some of the top factors that drive your firm's decision to build with mass timber? And what are some of the factors that drive the demand from the user side, the occupier side?
Yeah, I would say one of the catalysts for us was that we were really essentially cabinet makers and furniture makers when we first started, and I ended up going to architecture school and meeting my partner there, and had a shop for years building furniture and components of buildings ourselves. And so that was a sort of internal genesis, I think, that we always had a familiarity with wood and its function and its properties and the different characteristics of species. And then we essentially started to use less artisanal approaches to building with wood and started really looking at more industrialized methods. And we really came upon these large glue laminated structural members that we use for bridges and building frames. And then along came a sort of budding revolution, especially in Europe, in mass timber and the development of different products like cross-laminated timber, which is kind of a material du jour right now. So I think it's a really exciting thing. And then finally, I think we started through an expansion of a set of interests that were environmentally driven, questions about climate change and carbon mitigation. We started looking at the properties of wood, and particularly with the growth of the mass timber industry, its capacity to be applied to really dense, large buildings in cities, and therefore creating a much more potentially greater benefit if wood could be utilized to improve forest health, while also meeting demands of urbanization and population growth. We felt like there might be a really interesting equation in their formula for climate change mitigation.
So can you unpack that a little more? Like, just what are the carbon benefits that timber construction provides, and what would be the impacts if we saw greater adoption of it, like you're talking about in these urban settings?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So if you remember from high school biology class, the carbon cycle, and that atmospheric carbon in the form of carbon dioxide is absorbed by plant biomass, trees. And in doing so, in the presence of water and solar energy, essentially it creates a carbohydrate, which is like a sugar, a complex carbohydrate, which is wood, cellulose. And so what's happening essentially is forests and other plant biomass on the surface of the earth are drawing carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the fiber of the plants. And until those plants are either consumed by aerobic bacteria when they die and fall on the floor of the forest, or if they burn and they re-emit their carbon dioxide, that carbon stays stored in that wood, in that cellulose. The other side of the carbon cycle is that digesters and combustors burn carbohydrates, or in some cases, complex hydrocarbons, fossil hydrocarbons that we draw out of the earth, and we emit carbon dioxide. So we're emitters. Mankind, humankind, are emitters, and forests and other biosystems plant biosystems are absorbers. So now imagine that instead of allowing carbon to be re-emitted in the normal cycle of a forest's growth and death, you grab the wood out of the forest and you put it into buildings, which are the most durable consumer products we make. What you've done is essentially broken one of the cycles of the carbon cycle by interrupting it and pulling this, what's called fast domain carbon, the carbon that grows over the course of 10 to 150 years in forests and plants, and you're storing it in a kind of urban bank. What that means is, by doing that, we potentially offset all of the fossil hydrocarbon that we burned since the Industrial Revolution for industry and manufacturing and automobile transport and all these kinds of things, which we have essentially saturated the atmosphere with. And so we saw this as a potential kind of pump that would help absorb carbon and store it while we tried to mitigate carbon emissions in other places. And the importance about that is that carbon right now, while not the most toxic or hazardous greenhouse gas, is the most durable. And so essentially we've pumped a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and changed weather and climate patterns in really dramatic ways. And we thought that one of the largest land systems other than forests or oceans are cities, and that we could take advantage of that huge area and mass of material that we will inevitably need to build 2.3 billion people's worth of city space and housing and infrastructure. Now that's a kind of a bit of a pie in the sky projection, but we've analyzed it and found that actually cities, global cities by 2050 could be significant carbon storage systems.
Wow. That would be something to see, and it's pretty encouraging to hear about that kind of projection. I think another factor that we do hear about right now is this question of, on the investor side, on and certainly with some of the publicly traded companies, but I think also with private, this increasingly talk of ESG objectives being an important part of how people are making decisions on where to invest and what to build. So do you also see some of the driver coming from that side in terms of some of, like, or I mean, not, contributing to this demand for mass timber?
Yeah, I have it's a great question. I have a kind of optimist glass half full view and a more pessimistic one. The optimistic side is that I think society, and especially the generation that is going to be facing the most dire aspects of this environmental challenge or crisis, are more and more interested generationally in changing their consumer behavior. And I don't mean just consumer like whether you use plastic or whatever, but also like what you build things with in the case of buildings, for a couple of reasons. Health benefits, which are being increasingly shown to reside in wood products, wood interiors, but also the broader upstream environmental benefits of working with the wood. And so what we're seeing is a kind of greater social license in the use of wood, and a more profound understanding of the cyclical and varied nature of forests and forest growth and dynamics, and that wood utilization might benefit forests, which is an appealing story, and that's being researched very heavily. And I think for us it's quite conclusive that certain forests will benefit dramatically from being harvested carefully and sustainably. The health benefits of living in a wood building, and the fact of the renewability and the carbon benefits, all of these things are kind of accruing as a value add for builders, developers, planners.
That sounds good to me as well. I think we should do that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for walking us through all of this, and thanks for taking that time today.
Yeah, Dave, it was really nice talking to you. I hope we keep this up.